Hello everyone and welcome to another yet product-led growth webinar from Reinvent Growth. Today we have with us Gail Dude, Product Lead, and Chase Dwelling, Director of Strategic Alliances at JumpCloud. Both of them will dive into the pillars and best practices of their organization's product-led growth framework. And during our 45-minute session, Gail and Chase will discuss everything you need to know about their methodology, experimentation, and product-led growth delivery, along with how JumpCloud apply its framework to their partners' network. In details, the webinar's agenda will entail how the organization plans, runs, and analyzes product-led growth, the best practices from its strategy and the SaaS industry in order to help you accelerate PLG, KPIs and benchmarks from the product growth team, direct outcome of the product-led growth experiments conducted so far, and how JumpCloud leverages partners to expand PLG across several markets. Please note that you can write all your questions in the chat and they will be answered during our Q&A session in the end. Gail, over to you and welcome.
Thanks, Despina. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Gail Dowd, and I am the Growth Product Manager here at JumpCloud. Can you say hello?
Yeah, and hi, I'm Chase, and so I look after our strategic alliances here within JumpCloud.
Awesome. We're going to talk to you a little bit today about our growth engineering practice and how PLG is applied at the team level at JumpCloud, as well as the partnership level. Here's a quick overview. We'll start with the PLG framework at JumpCloud and how we plan, run, and analyze growth experiments as a growth engineering team. I'll talk through some of the lessons learned and a few, provide examples of a few of the kind of interesting experiments that we've completed over the last year or so, and then some high-level learnings at kind of a process and organizational standpoint. From there, Chase will talk a little bit about how we approach PLG from a partnership perspective, and then we'll end with a few kind of overarching best practices for PLG that we've learned in our time here at JumpCloud. All right, before we jump into the first half of our content, I think it's helpful to provide just a bit of an overview about JumpCloud as a company and what we do, what our product does. JumpCloud is building the next generation of directory services. For those who aren't aware, directory services are really the foundational piece of any IT organization, where a group or a single IT administrator is deciding who gets access to which IT resources across the company. Many companies of all different industry types and sizes rely on their directory services to enable their employees to do the work they need to get done. And with JumpCloud in particular, we've designed a product that allows IT admins to easily manage access control to systems, applications, files, and networks through one cloud-based platform. We're specifically focused on small to medium enterprise companies, sub 2,000 or so employees, and that lens has really fueled how we've developed our product from the beginning. So as we kind of transition from what we do into how PLG is applied, I think it's important to note that from the inception of the company, which started back in 2014, being customer-centric and providing value first was a big driver for our founders, and was really designed into the product before product-led growth was even like a coined industry term. So this was really rooted in maniacally understanding our target customer, IT administrators who are working at smaller to medium-sized companies who balance a lot of different responsibilities, and really understanding their core jobs to be done. What are the things that they need to accomplish in their day-to-day, and how does our product fit into as a solution for those jobs? We also know from like maniacal research that our IT admin customer types are a very specific kind of buyer. They prefer to get into the product, test it out, and really build trust themselves rather than being marketed to or sold to. And having that insight, we designed the product from the beginning with a freemium SaaS model, allowing anyone to sign up and test 10 users for free forever, to really explore, kick the tires, and understand the depth and value of the product. I think it's also helpful to note that PLG really fit well into our overall business model and strategy as taking on one of the biggest kind of figures in the directory services industry. Microsoft AD plays in a very different way than we as JumpCloud are designed to do. So to disrupt the industry in the way that we want to, we need to have a different business model that's really designed on delivering product value first, being cloud-based, being kind of more evolutionary with where technology is going, providing access to the cloud-based resources and systems that people are using today, like G Suite, AWS, Slack, etc. And then, again, for us, success is giving customer value before asking for an economic return in their money. Good deal. So taking a bit of a deeper lens, and we can talk a little bit about our team, our growth engineering team here at JumpCloud. We made the move to formalize growth engineering about 15 months ago. It was at the end of 2018. This was a deliberate decision made from the executive team and really kind of formed and communicated throughout the company. I think we designed the team in a way that was leveraging kind of internal expertise, senior engineers and folks with a lot of contextual knowledge across multiple disciplines, as well as hiring for certain skill sets to form this team that operates quite differently than our traditional engineering teams at JumpCloud. We consist of developers, product managers, UX design, and a combination of data analytics and marketing. And our teams are formed slightly differently than maybe our traditional feature development teams here at the company. We have a smaller ratio of developers to product and UX resources. So, for example, 2 to 3 developers to 1 product manager in UX design. We work on a much more iterative basis and are constantly pulling in lots of different types of quantitative data and kind of using different frameworks to help drive our experimentation and strategy. To give you a bit of a view of how we look at our spectrum of surface area that we as a growth engineering team are responsible for, we really want to drive frictionless adoption of the product. So this spans from everything, including sign up, getting the prospective customers, these new admins, signed up and into the product, helping them verify, landing them in their first session and guiding them through the product, getting them using it and familiar with the different spaces within the product, the different pieces of functionality, being available, and as they continue to evaluate the product and more or less test drive before rolling it out to their larger organization is also included here. And then kind of the opposite end from sign up includes the purchase experience. We want them to be able to buy what they want, when they want, without having to talk to sales if not needed. our core objectives that really map to that prospect journey that I just walked through include, again, enabling frictionless sign up. We want to get the new admin into the product as quickly as possible. And when we do get them into the product, we want them to experience a solution or see the solution to their pain point, to their job, as I was referencing earlier, within their first session. So this could include doing various different onboarding experiences, surfacing information at different times within that first experience, and really getting them in and sticky within the product and coming back as they continue to explore and test the product before moving into that purchasing phase. Again, like our product is designed where you can have up to 10 users for free forever. So your testing period could be a couple days, it could be a couple months. IT admins have an interesting situation where often they are the technical buyer, but they might not be the economic buyer. So being able to build a business case for this new solution before rolling it out to their larger organization and having the buy-in from their executive stakeholders is really important. We want to make it as easy and autonomous as possible for them to be able to build that case and then purchase in the way that they want to when the time is right and they have that decision made. A little bit on kind of our methodology as a growth engineering team and how we approach our practice of product-led growth from a team level. My team consists of roughly 6 to 8 individuals who are maniacally focused on developing data-driven experiments to improve our user experience with the goal of increasing our sign-up and our conversion rates throughout the kind of funnel that exists within our product. This consists of kind of a bucket list of items that we are focused on and we drive. But I think one thing that's really important is like we work maniacally to understand common user flows and points of friction within the product. And this is connected to a really significant use of quantitative data to help inform our work, and then where we can, we supplement with qualitative data. This is where we really rely on our data analytics kind of contributor and have done a lot of work to implement different event tracking and kind of monitoring systems, A/B testing, et cetera, to ensure that we're getting the data we need to understand how users are flowing through the product and where they're getting stuck, where that friction exists. As an overall principle, we work to apply the scientific method to our experimentation process and then the procedures that exist around that. We source experiment ideas from lots of different places, both from quantitative and qualitative data, as well as from within the company, and then leverage these kind of understandings and insights to ICE score and prioritize these experiments for testing. We'll talk a little bit more about the ICE score later in the session, but ICE stands for impact, confidence, and effort. It's maybe something that folks on the call are familiar with, but we'll dive into it here in a little bit. And then we've worked over the last year of the team's existence to really capture and define our decision-making criteria to inform our approach to our work and kind of the forward paths that come from experimentation once a specific iteration has been complete. From a higher level, I think as a growth engineering team, the presence of a growth mindset is extremely important. Often we're learning through failure, and being able to have a team that is kind of centered around this growth mindset and has the comfort and safety net of the ability to experiment heavily, fail a lot, but know that the few things that do come out successful will really drive our product forward is important. And then another like high level last note, collaboration is super key for us. We are highly cross-functional by nature. The makeup of our team is different from traditional engineering teams, but we're often going outside of our growth engineering bubble to work with marketing, sales, customer support, our solution architecture team to really help inform the direction of the user experience within the product. And the folks that we work with on a daily basis are observing friction in their worlds as well, and so that's a great resource for us to be able to drive forward progress and make real impact. All right. I'm going to dive into a few lessons learned from our time. Again, I mentioned that our growth engineering team has been in existence for about 15 months. In that time, we've learned a lot, and we've done a host of different experimentation efforts. A few success areas that we've found is we've had success in altering and experimenting with our sign-up flow and managing through several different iterations. I believe we are on our third or fourth in the past year now, and finding that that is increasingly improving sign-up conversion rates, which is really important for us. We need to be able to get the new user in the product as quickly as possible. A kind of second sub-step of sign-up includes verification. Eliminating, it's important for us to be able to eliminate any reason why someone wouldn't verify. Like if they're not getting a verification code or emails are being dropped, like that's a problem that we want to know about and want to resolve for, because again, it gets, it's important to get the admin into the product for the first time. And then I think third, another area where we've had success is experimenting in various onboarding flows. Particularly, we started with a checklist probably mid last year, found that had several characteristics that were contributing to higher conversion rates, and went ahead and productized that and have been using that for the time since, and are actively testing against it as well. On the flip side, while we've had successful experiments in our first year, we've also learned some tough lessons, which is a great thing as a growth engineering team. We've experimented with messaging and kind of repositioning certain features or paths to more subject matter expertise help within the product. And for certain reasons, those weren't as successful as intended. Also, another area that was a really interesting and more kind of recent learning we had is that as part of our sign-up experience, we ask new admins about their area of interest, and we were curious if we could take that area of interest and map that to a more tailored and customized onboarding experience for admins. I'll dive into this experiment in particular in a few slides, but there were some really interesting learnings that we had as a team that were more like procedure and process oriented, but this is part of kind of building the muscle of experimentation for a growth engineering team. So overall, like positive outcome there for the group, and we'll continue to experiment here. And then we've also done some experimentation with our verification process, resend buttons, moving up to a code, etc., and have some learnings there along the way as well. And then to note a couple kind of current experiments that we have in flight, we're currently experimenting with live in-app chat within the product for new admins who sign up. We essentially provide a premium support experience within their first 7 to 10 days of signing up for the product to really help provide a path to solving their solution and their pain, or finding a solution for their pain point as quickly as possible. More to come there, but that should be wrapping up in the next week or so. This is a really great example of a highly cross-functional experiment. We've had to partner with multiple orgs to get this up and running. In particular, our customer support team, who is the kind of individuals supporting the actual chat app, and then our finance organization to ensure that we had the right chat access and things like that, as well as security. I'm going to dive in a little bit into a few experiments and kind of how we kind of provide a model for how we design them and show some of the results as well. I had previously mentioned on the last slide about our tailored onboarding checklist experiment. Again, context here was that we had a hypothesis that by adding kind of interest-specific content, in this case, system-specific content, to the onboarding checklist for admins who said that they were particularly interested in systems, we would be able to deliver more value more quickly as we're directing them to the area of interest in that perceived pain point that they had. On the left, you'll see our control group, which included our kind of existing checklist, which provides 3 kind of core steps to get started within the product, and then a path to a resource of an admin's choosing. On the right, we've taken that same checklist and then tweaked the final step to be tailored to that system-specific interest, and then provided a video across the 3 operating systems that are primarily used by a majority of our admins, Mac, Windows, and Linux, as a means to kind of more directly show them how to actually install the system and get them moving more quickly. For each of our experiments, we define a hypothesis, and then we define a primary success metric with a range of kind of improvement that we'd like to see and possible paths depending on how the experiment performs. For this one in particular, we defined our success metric as an observable improvement in the percentage of admins interested in systems who actually add a system as part of being served this variation of the tailored onboarding checklist experiment. And what we learned is that from a process and procedure standpoint, the volume of people who were selecting into systems and then having that split into A/B groups was just too low to really surface an outcome of statistical significance, which is something we're always striving for. But depending on where within the funnel those experiments are set, we can run into different challenges based on how many people are actually getting to this step within the product. As you can see in this graph, there was little difference in the two, and then over time, basically those lines continue to cross, which showed that we're consistently being inconsistent. So we made the decision to roll back this experiment, and the major learning here was working on our ability to define traffic estimates as we work on scope for experiments. Another quick example of an experiment with more positive outcome. I mentioned earlier we've worked on a couple different iterations of our sign-up flow. This was a experiment where we took our original sign-up page, which you can see here on the left includes multiple different fields in one page, can be a bit overwhelming and asking for different types of data that may or may not be relevant to someone who just wants to get into the product and actually use it. Our thinking here was that by updating the look and kind of splitting out some of the questions into a multi-page flow, we would be easing the burden on the admin as they sign up and more quickly push them through the sign up experience. We set a primary success rate metric of increasing our free account sign up conversion rate by a relative 10%. And after a few weeks of experimentation, we reached an outcome of improving the sign-up rate by 13.5 relative percentage points as compared to the control. This is a significant and statistically significant outcome for us. And so the next step that the team chose to implement was by productizing this new variant. I think it's important to note, and one thing that I can share with the group is that outcomes from experiments vary depending on performance and volume, etc. In some cases, we decide to productize an experiment based on its performance and like clear kind of championship over a control. In other cases, we may decide to productize something because it's what's best for the user experience and leveling up the overall experience within the product. If there are negative effects on key conversion rates, we of course will pull that back and really analyze what variables contributed to the negative outcome, and we'll often go back and iterate on those experiments as well. But it's really kind of on a case-by-case basis, often discussed as a team and collectively decided upon as a team. Cool. I have 2 more slides here before I send it over to Chase. But thought it was important to share for anyone who's exploring starting a growth team a few high-level learnings from both a process and an organizational standpoint. I've mentioned that we're about a year old, and one thing that I would stress to anyone who's exploring beginning and starting a growth engineering group within their company is that it takes time to really implement all the foundational tools and data tracking needed to both generate and run and then measure experiments with the depth and kind of rigor that we do as a team. A lot of we were able to experiment a lot within the first year, but we also had to work on patching gaps that existed as we continue to kind of like build up our muscle around this. Kind of the like related to that includes working on strengthening our own team processes and procedures through kind of always approaching new processes as a pilot and working to understand what learnings do we have, what worked, what didn't, and adjust as we go along. One thing that we've stayed true to, and I think this definitely ties to the scientific method piece that is core to our growth engineering team, is always documenting everything we do. In some ways, we have to be even more metrics and document driven than other teams within our company, because we're relying on metrics to input what we do and then the metrics as an output for what we do next. This is something that I'm actually really proud of our team for doing, because whenever we go back to an experiment we may have done months ago, we have an accurate view of what our decisions were and how we designed that experiment and what we learned, so that then we can kind of manage that effectively and use that going forward. And then lastly, being able to effectively manage your key variables for impact and confidence scoring has taken time and tuning and a lot of learning really to build that. And I would say we're still very much improving our practices here, but understanding kind of all of the inputs that go into your decision-making process for what experiment you go build, how it gets built, and then how you decide or make decisions on the outcomes is extremely important. From an organizational standpoint, I think as with any new team that's going to function maybe differently or in a new way than an organization is used to, executive sponsorship is critical. And for growth engineering, this in particular was something that was decided upon by our executive team and then communicated out and actively supported through visibility, a lot of excitement and momentum, and then providing, the executive team provides cover and a safety net for the team as we get organized and really kind of up to the status of a well-oiled machine, which we're nearing today. Having principles for your growth engineering team helps provide clarity, both for the individuals within that group, but also your cross-functional stakeholders. If there could very, very well be a case for your teams, as it is with ours, where we aren't owning particular code bases, but often going out to other teams and diving into their code bases to run experiments, and then coming back in and out. And so a shared understanding of what growth engineering aims to achieve, how we do our work, what constitutes as experiment ready versus production ready, and kind of the agreement between engineering teams for how code gets reviewed and then put into production for experimentation purposes is really important. We definitely experienced friction here and are still working to get everyone on the same page. So great stakeholder management challenge here, but one that doesn't come with a lot of growth and learning. We've also experienced a lot of growth in our actual team since our inception, going from maybe 4 core individuals to 8. That influence of bandwidth and capacity also comes with needing to adjust your processes for new skill sets and get people up to speed, and that takes time. I think remaining true to the core processes and what's valued as a team is important, and then adjusting where needed is has been a big learning for us. And then finally, I mentioned this earlier, but building strong cross-functional relationships with key stakeholders across the business as you continue to experiment, both within the growth engineering context, but then kind of expand out into partnerships with other orgs is extremely important. And kind of having that rapport and understanding helps us go a lot faster. So, great. All right, I'm going to take a little break, and Chase is going to take over and talk about product-led growth with partners.
Yeah, why on earth would you ever want partners in your product-led growth company? So there's just some considerations to bring with that, right? And so I'll be talking a little bit how we handle partners and alliances as you take a look at your broader ecosystem, all the different players that you're working with. And so before we dive into it, I wanted to kind of level set. There's a couple different flavors within partners at JumpCloud. So our first is really through our traditional channels, right? So selling through MSPs and kind of resellers. So there's growth from that perspective and selling through the channel. But then there's also this go-to-market partnerships. And this is where it's more of kind of the marketing alliances, the joint stories, press releases, kind of all those fun things. And so that's the group that I look after. And so I'll be looking at a couple different ways how you can bring those product-led essentially mediums specifically for partners. And so a couple of these, there's so many tricks and kind of tools within a marketer's tool belt as far as, joint webinars and events and press releases and trading social posts and all those fun things, right? And so you will continue to do all those things. However, when you're approaching it from a product-led growth perspective, there's a couple other areas that actually almost take a little bit more of a priority based on how you're trying to scale your organization and working with your partners. So the first is actually just promoting it directly in your product, right? So having, the ability for other people to interact within your own product user experience. And what does that look like to drive growth? And then also within documentation, here is really, people are searching for a need and, hey, does it do X, right? They're really hunting for a solution. So it's building out all of those different edge cases. So that way, if you don't do it, perhaps there's another partner that you can do to leverage those. And then finally, within just kind of more additional content, right? So highly driven, kind of SEO focused, where it's really focusing on what you can do together and providing that need. So this is more of, the art of the possible and kind of opening things up within that. So I'm going to share a couple different examples of things that we've done with our partners. So the first is actually with Duo. And so for those who aren't familiar with Duo, they're an MFA provider. So essentially, if we are the castle of kind of, that identity management, we want to make sure that we work with everyone else's keys, right? So kind of, as you show up, kind of what are your things? And so this is great because we are actually able to put Duo directly within the product. And the other thing that's really nice is we're also aligned within their kind of pricing and how they purchase, which is going to become important. I'll kind of talk a little bit in how we approach and measure partners. But the fact that we also have 10 free users, free forever, and they also have that, it made really good sense to kind of have them right in the products. That way people can try enhanced security for free, if they want to toggle that on. Another example within documentation, right? And so this is essentially how can you get, product-led growth from other people's products, which is my favorite. And so because people, they're looking within a similar ecosystem of players, right? So we play very specifically kind of, if you want to think within the identity stack of IT management, focusing on directory and kind of what are all those different pieces that you need that digital identity for. And so by having that documentation, not only on your own site, but on other people's sites, as far as, hey, we kind of work with everything, that helps have a larger ecosystem effect that will kind of live and sit on there and continue to scale out, right? And so if you have a whole bunch of different partners that are promoting your wares, that makes it a lot easier for kind of inbound traffic, especially when it's on an organic need basis, right? I'm going to paper cut for cloud printing, but I need this to work with my directory. How do I get that done? And so it's really kind of solving for those use cases. And then finally on blogs. And so I think everyone will kind of get used to kind of writing guest posts and getting those other things. We have kind of JumpCloud focus on blogs is not only how we approach the market, but particularly when we're working with partners, what is the joint solution or use case that we can really talk about? Again, this is really diving into kind of what is the art of the possible between the two different organizations. Why on earth, would people buy both of your products together? How do they both work? What is the integrated solution? And so having that top of mind, really kind of putting your product marketing hat on while you're building this out, that helps kind of evangelize, especially from other people's products, to kind of drive a little bit more traffic your way. So now, how do we pick our partners? And so just like, running experiment within the product, we also run experiments with partners. Granted, some of them we hope to have, last a couple of longer than a couple weeks, right? But we want to make sure that we have, a specific hypothesis of why we're picking partners, why we're investing time and relationship with them, as opposed to other people that we could be doing that with. So there's a couple of different things that we will look for specifically, and I'll bring them up here. So the first is that common stack. So I mentioned earlier, kind of we live within that identity stack of IT management, right? And so is there a joint solution that also lives within that stack that, it's a familiar either logo or brand or kind of use case that we can partner with? The second one is, are their purchase patterns the same? This one can be a little bit more nuanced because, particularly within the technology and software space, you get so excited that it works in the first place. You're like, oh my gosh, this is going to change the world. But if you're looking at organizations that sell closer to an enterprise B2B type model where their sales cycles are 9 to 12 months, and you're trying to be a PLG model where you're looking after high velocity self-serve time, you want to make sure that not only you guys are both capturing value in the same way, but then how you treat value across the entire customer lifespan is very similar. Because if you are setting the precedent for how customers are going to buy from you, they also kind of have that same expectation of how customers should buy from your partners, right? And interacting with the rest of your technology. The last piece is kind of a price score. And so this is our internal scoring for partners. Is actually a riff on kind of the rice and ice score that is very popular. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about kind of how we look at it from the partner lens, and then we can cover a little bit more about how we look at it from the product lens. So within the RICE score, we really look after kind of the number of eyeballs when we're talking about reach, because from the go-to-market perspective, it's about marketing, right? And so we'll move on from there and kind of get a ballpark sense of, how big do we think this thing is? And then the second is the impact on the company. And really here it's kind of what is the type of leverage that this relationship will be? Are we looking after kind of the Googles and the AWSs of the world, or are we really honing in on just customer specific edge cases that is common enough to, create a partnership, but not really common enough to, drive a huge portion of the product roadmap? And then confidence, this is really kind of, just a smell test, right? Of, how far along are we going to take this? Is this just going to be trading a couple blog posts and calling it a day? Or are we going to go all the way down the line of, co-selling, account mapping, all those fun things, essentially working deeply with partners? And then finally, effort. This is kind of that last piece that really judges, the shortest time job first type of mentality, and making sure that you're focusing on partners and experiments in a timely manner that you can actually get value back out of. And so how we modify this essentially for the partner is taking all those things, combining that up, and then essentially having a partner multiplier. And so what this does is it kind of puts that reality back in check, that regardless of whatever you're looking to build out on your side and kind of all the different go-to-market pieces that you have, making sure that the partner's also engaged, right? Because if you're building out a ton of infrastructure, but no one else on the other side is really listening, that has a much lower effect than if someone who's highly engaged with you, even though they might be a smaller organization, they can at least bring things to market and kind of get some of those pieces going a lot quicker. And what this does too is it allows you to kind of focus within the larger, broader ecosystem of all those different things. So that way you can actually size all those partners back in together and have a little bit more focus on kind of how you prioritize and focus on your partners. And so that's kind of how the view that we look like from the pricing or kind of the RICE model. And so I'm actually going to hop back up here. I'd love to hear your thought points on kind of what's different from here as you transition from partners kind of thinking about product proper.
Again, we look at the ICE piece of price, so impact, confidence, and effort. Impact is really like what change do we think this is going to make, and like outcome that will happen for the user. Confidence is particularly a measure of like what do we have in our tool chest that's going to like help influence our confidence and that we will have the impact that we're saying, right? There's a really interesting model out on the internet that I can link and send it to Spina to share with the group after this, but confidence scores go from like a gut feeling to like, yeah, I think this is good, to like hard quantitative data that shows that this will impact, like tie closely. So having a high confidence score without a lot of data is actually really challenging. And then effort for us is more of a team metric that we discuss and talk about, like the technical lift, the cross-functional kind of operational lift that it will take. And so I, as a product manager, am responsible for determining impact and confidence using the resources at my disposal, while we use effort as really that like kind of weight and size of the job, size of the work, excuse me, as a team to determine that piece. So we add all three together for a total score.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the metrics of feels and kind of how it's all combined in. All right, perfect. And so I think with that, one of the other couple things we just wanted to talk about is some other very just kind of tactical best practices from JumpCloud. I know we spoke a lot about some of these already and kind of, how we're thinking about different frameworks and what does that implementation look like, both from products, but then also kind of the end impacts on users.
Great. So a couple of like best practices when it comes to setting a foundation for experimentation within your organization. That's a lot of IONs. Prioritization framework is key. It's something that I touched on earlier, but how are we assessing what's going to drive the most impact in the product? And like how are we ordering that against all of the different things that we could do? There may be something that's more ready to go, but is going to have a lighter impact. There's also the kind of consideration of, are there conflicting experiments that could be out at the same time and kind of muddling results? There is kind of a finesse in layering how those actually get done. Our assessment process, having kind of defined ways that you approach assessing experiments, utilizing something like an ICE score to determine the relative impact and confidence and then effort, and then using that to rank and help prioritize is important. For us in particular, event tracking is extremely key, being able to measure and track those different user flows and understand where the friction is. We use Segment for all of our event tracking, and it's been a heavy lift and an ongoing effort to integrate event tracking into the product across all of the different areas, high level and deep, where a user can be interacting with our product and ensure that we are building up a base of understanding for each of those. Experiment configuration is important as well. Like if you design and build an experiment, you need to be able to like measure it and watch it in the wild. We use Optimizely for our A/B testing, in addition to some views that are kind of a combination of Segment and Optimizely. We use Sysense, formerly known as Periscope, to visualize our event tracking data and run some analysis as well. We're lucky enough not only to have a data analytics expert, but a statistician with a PhD who also serves as a developer on our team. And between them, they're often using p-values and all sorts of statistical significant formulas to ensure that we're getting the most accurate outcomes as possible. And then I've mentioned this multiple different times, but cross-functional collaboration is key, being able to communicate out the objectives and values of your growth organization and what it's designed to deliver and achieve for the company, and kind of ensuring that stakeholder alignment and communication from the start would round out that kind of set of, if you're going to go start a growth organization, be thinking about these things.
Yeah, do them all. Perfect. Some other quick things just before we head off. One other thing that I think it's important to mention is as you go through and have a lot of, you're constantly building out experiments for building out features, is also pay attention to the value that you're capturing, and specifically in regards to how you're pricing your product. So we actually went through a huge pricing exercise not too long ago, actually with the help of the OpenView partner team, in kind of looking at how our customers buy, what does that path look like, key moments of truth, kind of how we can qualify them from the product, but then also how that's related back to pricing. So that way, as we continue to build out all these different things, that we're also capturing value, right? Because it's one thing to kind of continue to build the product, but your finance teams will be infinitely more happy, right? If you can kind of continue to pull back and make sure that, all your efforts are profitable as well. And what we found from this, so I'll just move on to this slide real quick, is just kind of a quick visual representation of our product. Not to sell you, but just to kind of give you a sense of all the different spaces that we play with, right? So as we look into systems and networks and applications and kind of storage, what that looks like, we often find customers that are like, oh, I just need this one thing, right? Coming back, if you put your going back to like either the documentation or Art of the Possible from blogs, if you're working with partners, is oftentimes people are hunting and looking for a certain solution. And so if you can at least win in one category of that solution, that's probably better than losing the deal outright. And so if you're trying to force people into kind of different ways of packaging your product, right, that might not be ideal for how they're looking to buy your product. And so we will always kind of have this bundled holistic value. And obviously it makes sense for us to kind of sell all pieces of these kind of 4 quadrants to prospects and customers, but we might only really be solving a need for one of those. And so if we can allow our customers kind of purchase and interact with us the way that they want to, that really helps streamline a lot of those areas. And the last thing that I want to share is very tactically, but this has saved me a lot of times, is I love working with Spark. So it's an Adobe product. And really what this does, it allows us to create pretty high level, but joint demo solution videos that are pretty polished right away. And so it's one of those areas that as you're working with partners specifically, you get past through legal, and then you're working through the integration, and then it goes into more like the holistic go-to-market pieces of, who's going to produce what does that one-pager look like? Do people even read one-pagers anymore? And that's always a discussion. And so creating that quick high-level visual aspect of here's what's happening, here's how to do it and enable it, and creating those quick videos and then inserting it both within documentation, or if you're leading with standing over webinars, those types of things, that's really been helpful in kind of accelerating that go-to-market piece. So that way it increases the confidence scoring, not only kind of within yourself and what you're able to deliver, but then also from the partner side as well. All right. So I think that's enough from us for the moment. So we're gonna open it up to questions and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Jace. We have a few questions. I will start with one that is pretty much the same, asked twice. They ask actually what tools you are using to implement PLG. Do you have a specific tool in mind? I'm sorry. And to narrow down this a bit further, what do you use for event tracking in general, apart from Optimizely, that is already mentioned?
Yes, so I touched on a few of these, but I'll expand on a few more tools that we use. I wouldn't say there's one single tool in our tool set that is it's like our go-to PLG. We've more like formed a set of tools that work well for us. We use Segment for event tracking, and we push a majority of that event tracking into SysSense, which was formerly known as Periscope, for visualization of that data. This is often where we're configuring through SQL a breadth of different conversion rates, monitoring usage, etc., across the product. We can also configure analysis for particular experiments. We've learned a lot about our A/B testing tool Optimizely and how they determine kind of statistical significance. And there are a few different approaches that we have where we're, sometimes we trust our own configuration in Periscope a bit more readily than Optimize. It just depends. But we like having the two different views so we can ensure that we're kind of like double checking the data more or less. We also use Airtable to organize all of our different experiment ideas and kind of prioritize those, and very dynamic spreadsheet like tool that's very helpful. As a larger product organization, we use Product Board to collect all forms of customer feedback, sales success data, and kind of put that all in one spot and can tag it in ways that can be useful for us as a growth team as well. If we're hearing feedback that there's friction in certain areas, that's a light for our team to go chase after that and spin up new experiments to resolve that friction.
Thank you so much, Gail. So I'm moving forward to the next one. How is your PLG organization structured? What are the roles? And is this in addition to an analytics team, or is that part of PLG?
That's a really good question. And also something that my manager, our head of growth engineering and user experience, put a lot of thought into as she designed our team. We went out into the product-led growth community and consulted with several companies who had formed growth engineering teams ahead of us, and were maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, and solicited a lot of feedback on their learnings and what worked well for them. We made the deliberate decision to put growth engineering under user experience and not directly reporting into product, due to the kind of core user experience nature of the team. I've mentioned this in a few kind of voiceovers, but our team is designed a bit differently. We're part product, we're part product marketing, we're part like growth marketing. And so that positioning under user experience made a lot more sense for our organization. And then from a team perspective, we consist of smaller groups of developers matched with product managers and marketers. We do have a resource that acts as our kind of data analytics lead. He's also shared across the company. So I think, you know, moving towards someone who is more dedicated to growth in time will be a goal for us, as that is such a key component of our work.
Okay, moving more forward to the next one, which is how you manage to make the PLG model an intentional effort across your organization.
Again, this really starts from the top. Having executive leadership buy-in and belief, and frankly, like cover, is extremely important. When this team was formed, there was a company-wide announcement with a feature presentation of what is growth engineering, how does it relate to PLG, and we, you know, as a company realized that we were very much PLG. We fit into this, and so we've leaned into it. Growth engineering is really the leaders and kind of like the evangelists for product-led growth within the company. So any opportunity we have to partner with another organization, we're always calling back to product-led growth at a high level. And I think this is really disseminated across the company in the last year. We will, you know, partner with one of our venture capitalist firms, do some analytics work, and come back with a host of insights, which we as a growth team are jumping on, but we're sharing those out more broadly with the sales organization, marketing, and customer support. And they're taking those insights and they're adjusting their processes and approaches to selling or to marketing, and you know, actually applying those. So it's very top of mind throughout the company. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Chase.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would say is like, you know, that coverage from the top is really important, because if you think about, you know, everyone has different priorities that they're trying to push through, and it's always easy to say, well, you know, we'll just have that growth team, like just pull on another feature that, you know, our biggest customer wants, or kind of whatever that is. And so having that discipline to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on these enhancements instead. And really, you know, that's kind of the reliance on a lot of the metrics, because that's how teams, you know, essentially are able to manage up and say, you know, this is the consistent, constant value that we're bringing, just like any other feature team, right? As you're constantly building out new things, it just happens to be more nuanced, more focused, especially, you know, I think for me, I've been, you know, living here for a little bit, right? So that notion of why shouldn't it be within user experience, right? Like, how could it not be? Because that's usually the fastest moving or like, you know, piece of any software that people are interacting with. But it's a notion that needs to be addressed, because it's also seen as what value you're bringing, and constantly having those metrics is super key.
Thank you so much, both. I have a last one, and then we will wrap it up for today. You mentioned a few examples of PLG best practices earlier. Is there any advice you would like to give in regards to what organizations should do to avoid, what actual organizations should avoid when employing a PLG model?
That's a really good question. I think Chase hit on one where it's like, without a clearly defined like objective and boundaries, a growth team could easily catch lots of different work that isn't necessarily core or driving towards those growth objectives. That's something I think we've learned about and managed, not in like a necessarily like particularly challenging way, but sometimes if there isn't an owner for something, it can be easy to say, well, like growth, they do all sorts of things. Let's hand it over to them. And we've, you know, been able to help in certain circumstances, but also over time been able to negotiate that work back or find more automated or scalable solutions for that particular problem set the company is having, and kind of reclaim our space and our territory, our bandwidth, more or less, for the core work that we're focused on doing.
Yeah, I think one other thing is just kind of making sure the metrics that you after are not only worth the time, right? Because it's an expensive effort to kind of go and run these experiments. So making sure that the data that you're after is kind of worth that. But I think also too, don't forget that, organizations are fluid bodies, right? And so it comes back to Gail's point of document everything, because I've seen multiple times where, someone will come in, will leave, will try an experiment, and then 6 months, 9 months later, you kind of have some fresh blood in, and you're like, oh, well, this worked great at a previous organization, not realizing that, that company just went through that same exercise 6, 9 months ago, right? And kind of reinvesting in it. So it's always good to go back and say like, oh yeah, we tried that integration. That fell flat on its face, and here's why, right? Or, the core infrastructure, there's key assumptions about, how the company was built that aren't exactly the same. And so I think just kind of documenting everything that you're doing, kind of being disciplined about that, and then also using that as the archive to bring people up to speed. I don't think enough people kind of go back through the library of all the experiences that have come before them as they entered in a PLG organization to kind of figure out, what's the organization's ability to not only execute on things, but what are the right things to go after.
Yeah, I think that's great. If I can add one comment to that. I had a conversation with Dari Contractor, who's the head of growth at Airtable a few months ago, and he gave the advice of like growth teams should be focused on a metric that everyone cares about, but often have a surface area that no one cares about. And like to your point about metrics, like it would probably be a disservice to your growth engineering team if you had them focus on a metric that wasn't at a core company metric and a core company goal. We are able to align ourselves directly to like revenue and like account growth, which is often like sometimes even clearer than our other engineering teams. Like it takes a little more work to piece that together, but our objectives are extremely clear and we know that they matter to the business. And we work on navigating the surface area challenge daily, but are again, like building our rapport across that. So.
Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you so much, Chase. That was from us today. Please stay tuned for the next Product-Led Growth webinar, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye all.